Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're looking at the overarching architecture of the PRINCE2 design theme. And look, you need to think of this not just as some dry set of administrative documents, but as a living, interactive blueprint for transforming an entire organization. Seriously, consider how many massive change initiatives fail spectacularly simply because they lack this exact foundational blueprint. When you're leading a huge transition, you can't just start laying bricks and hope a cathedral magically emerges, right? You absolutely need a rigorous design. The PRINCE2 framework gives us this dynamic system to map out exactly how programs are structured. It makes sure the end state is crystal clear and that the data around benefits and risks is perfectly synthesized before you even think about overhauling your business.
To make sense of this dense methodology, we're going to build our understanding step by step. First, we'll uncover the program's North Star. Then we'll look at realizing measurable benefits. 3, navigating program risks. 4, unpacking the target operating model. And finally, number 5, we'll break down the key documents and roles. So we're starting with the grand vision and working our way right down to the granular nuts and bolts.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the program's North Star.
So what exactly are we trying to achieve, and how will we know when we finally get there? This is literally the fundamental question every single program has to answer before a single dollar is spent or a project is launched. If you can't answer this clearly, you're just spending money in the dark, and your resources are going to scatter instantly. Designing a program means bringing absolute, undeniable clarity to these 2 points so that everyone is moving in the exact same direction.
And that brings us to the vision statement. This is our anchor. It's a concise, totally jargon-free snapshot of the future, specifically designed to motivate really diverse groups of stakeholders. Think of it as the ultimate elevator pitch for your future state. You don't want to get bogged down in technical constraints or project milestones here, because the second you drop heavy technical jargon, your stakeholders are going to tune out. Instead, it needs to tell a compelling, outward-facing story of what the organization will look, feel, and operate like once the dust is settled. It has to engage both hearts and minds, proving to everybody involved that sticking to the status quo, yeah, that's just no longer an option.
Let's look at a real-world example, the National Rail Network Program. The government originally launched this massive initiative with a super dense policy document. I'm talking pages of technical jargon about capacity allocation and infrastructure maintenance. And naturally, it caused immediate confusion. But the senior responsible owner wisely realized that a dry government policy document is definitely not a vision. It's not going to inspire a train conductor, and it's sure not going to inspire a daily commuter. A true vision has to translate policy into compelling, stakeholder-focused goals. So they rewrote it into plain English, highlighting things like regional equality, maximum value for the public purse, and universal accessibility. And that right there is how you synthesize a dense mandate into a genuine, inspiring North Star.
Moving right along to Section 2, realizing measurable benefits.
Okay, so the absolutely crucial point here is that benefits generally fall into 2 distinct categories. Picture them as 2 separate funnels. First up, we have efficiency benefits. Think of this as doing more for the same, or doing the same for less. We're talking cost reduction, cost avoidance, or maybe processing way more queries without adding any new staff. Then, over in the second funnel, we have effectiveness benefits. This is all about better results and higher adaptability. So for example, imagine a hospital implementing a brand new triage system that drastically reduces patient wait times. That's higher compliance standards, better customer satisfaction, or getting to market faster. And here's the key. Balancing efficiency with effectiveness is what actually justifies the massive financial investment your program needs in the first place.
Now, to map out how we actually achieve these benefits, we build what's called a benefits map. And you can take 2 different approaches to connect the how with the why. You can start way up high, taking your big organizational objectives and decomposing them downwards into specific bite-sized project outputs. Or you can start at the ground level, looking at your everyday project outputs and aggregating them upwards to see how they fulfill those massive goals. In practice, it's usually this iterative, sometimes kind of messy process of reconciling both directions. But eventually, top-down meets bottom-up right in the middle to create a flawless map of dependencies. The end result? A perfectly clear path from a daily task all the way to the grand vision.
But listen, reality is complex, and we have to acknowledge the downside. Enter the disbenefit. This is a measurable decline resulting from a specific outcome. Because look, what serves as a massive efficiency benefit to the finance department might actually be a measurable disbenefit to the customer service department if it increases their administrative workload. Acknowledging this doesn't mean your program is failing. In fact, being totally transparent about disbenefits builds enormous trust with your stakeholders. It shows them that the blueprint is realistic, not just some fairy tale, and it ensures that this natural tension is carefully managed by leadership.
To track all of this, we generate a benefit profile, Let's look at a real-world charity realignment. Imagine pulling up a dashboard where your abstract goals are actively translated into hard, trackable dials and gauges. This charity didn't just say, hey, we want to be better. No, they specifically said they wanted a 20% increase in raised funds, a 10% increase in users served, and a minimum 80% staff satisfaction rate. These dynamic profiles dictate exactly what will be measured, who the operational owner is, and what the baseline data actually looks like.
And look closely at this specific metric. That 5%, that was the maximum acceptable attrition rate for staff and volunteers during the charity program's massive transition. Changing a business deeply scares people for sure. But by putting a hard cap on this attrition rate, it forced leadership to manage the human and emotional transition just as carefully as the financial one. It proved that retaining human expertise and maintaining a strong culture is just as measurable and just as critical as boosting revenue. All right, let's jump to Section 3, Navigating Program Risks.
Programs are inherently uncertain. You're dealing with massive amounts of ambiguity. But it's absolutely vital to recognize that ambiguity breeds both threats that we need to mitigate, those are your downside risks, and opportunities, or upside risks that we need to actively exploit. For instance, maybe a sudden currency fluctuation actually makes a critical building material much cheaper. Risk management isn't just about playing defense, It's also about capturing unexpected value when the data point's in your favor.
And instead of just looking at risks project by project, the PRINCE2 design theme demands that we aggregate them. Take this utilities provider example. Initially, individual project managers were working in complete silos, totally missing the big picture. So rather than having 10 different project managers stressing out about local rain delays, the program aggregated the data into a centralized map. This let them see the overarching systemic threat of regional weather patterns and floods. Because they synthesized this data, they could safely optimize labor and equipment routing across the entire board. They literally turned a logistical nightmare into a massive efficiency win.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Target Operating Model.
This is the Target Operating Model, or the TOM. Now, while the vision statement is your broad, inspiring picture, the TOM is the granular, detailed schematic of the future organization. It's so crucial to understand that the TOM doesn't tell you how to get there. Your project transition plans are the vehicles, the TOM is strictly the destination. It defines precisely what the machinery of the business will look like, function like, and feel like on the exact day the program crosses the finish line.
To ensure this model is perfectly comprehensive, it's built on 7 interconnected aspects: processes, culture, organization, technology, infrastructure, information and data, and knowledge and learning. Think of these as 7 interlocking puzzle pieces of your destination. If you pull on one piece, all the others shift. You can't just overhaul your technology without also reshaping the culture, the data, and the processes that support it. If you install some state-of-the-art IT system but totally ignore knowledge and learning, your staff won't have a clue how to use it, and you'll realize exactly 0 benefits. All 7 of these aspects must be designed in total unison. Let's map this onto our real scenario using a bank compliance program. Think of this gap analysis as a matrix where you can visually track the massive leap required. You define your current state, you map out your future state based on the TOM, and the space between them, that's your gap. Look at the culture row here. They're moving from a highly insular, protective mindset to an adaptable, fast failure mindset. Down on the technology row, they're jumping from rigid legacy systems all the way to open interfaces. By tracking all 7 aspects through this matrix, the sheer scale of the transformation you need to pull off becomes impossible to ignore.
Finally, Section 5, Key Documents and Roles.
Every critical document we've explored today is governed by specific key roles to ensure the design remains totally aligned with reality. The Senior Responsible Owner, or SRO, is your ultimate approver, the person who holds and defends that grand vision. Then you have the Program Manager, providing the rigorous day-to-day leadership to actually execute the design. And critically, there's the Business Change Manager. They act as the fierce protector of business-as-usual operations. And there's a natural, very necessary tension here. The Change Manager ensures that the benefits profile is actually achievable for the operations teams, and a guarantee that the new target operating model won't accidentally break the business when it goes live.
And that is the absolute power of the PRINCE2 design theme. It forces you to define your North Star, map out your benefits, aggregate your risks, and detail your operating model way before you start disrupting your business. So as we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with this question to think about. Is your next big transformation relying on a rigorous, measurable blueprint for change? Or are you just drafting hopeful paperwork in the dark?